Good evening, traveler. Tonight, I would like to tell you about a sound I once followed, deep within the quiet forest of Whispergrove. It was not a loud sound, nor was it sudden. In truth, I almost failed to notice it at all. So settle in and let us unfold this story together. It happened during a stretch of days when the forest seemed particularly still. Not silent, no. Whispergrove is never truly silent. But there are times when its many small voices grow softer, as though the trees themselves are listening for something just beyond hearing. I had been walking for some hours beneath a tall canopy of pine and birch, following a narrow path that wound its way between moss-covered stones and shallow roots that reached across the earth like quiet reminders of the forest's age. The air carried that familiar coolness found only in deeper woodland, where sunlight arrives gently and never lingers long. And the ground beneath my boots was soft with fallen needles, each step absorbed into the forest without complaint. There was birdsong, of course, a few distant calls drifting lazily from branch to branch, and now and then the quiet rustle of something small moving through the undergrowth. All as it should be. Yet as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice a subtle change. At first, it was the birds. Their calls, once scattered and unhurried, began to grow less frequent, not all at once, and not entirely, but enough that their absence felt deliberate. Then the wind, which had until then moved easily through the trees, softened into something far more cautious, as though it too had grown uncertain of its place. I slowed my steps, not out of concern, but out of that quiet awareness the forest teaches you over time, the sense that something has shifted, even if the reason has not yet revealed itself. It was then that I heard it. Faint. So faint, in fact, that I first mistook it for the distant murmur of water. A stream, perhaps, or a narrow fall somewhere beyond the trees. But the forest does not repeat itself so precisely, and this sound did. I came to a stop along the path and listened more carefully. There it was again, not the uneven rush of water finding its way over stone, but something far more measured, a sequence of tones rising and falling with quiet intention. Music, though it would be some time before I allowed myself to name it as such. For a while I simply stood there, listening. The sound drifted gently between the trees, carried not by the wind, but by something steadier, something that did not waver or wander. It remained consistent, and that, more than anything, was what set it apart. The forest is a place of variation. No two sounds ever arrive in quite the same way twice. Even the wind changes its mind from moment to moment. But this was exact. The same tones, the same spacing between them, again and again, like a memory that refused to fade. Curiosity, as it often does, asked me to step away from the path, and after only a brief consideration, I agreed. The trees grew a little closer together as I left the trail behind, their trunks rising tall and patient around me. The ground sloped gently downward, and the air carried with it a faint coolness that suggested water lay somewhere ahead. With each step, the sound became clearer, no longer distant, no longer uncertain. Music, now unmistakably so. A violin, if I judged it correctly. The notes were soft, yet carried with surprising clarity through the stillness of the forest. Each one placed carefully beside the last, forming a melody that seemed almost familiar, though I could not say why. And yet, even as its beauty revealed itself, something about it remained, unsettled. Not wrong, but incomplete. As though the melody had been given only a single path to follow, and had been walking it for far longer than it was ever meant to. The forest, for its part, had grown quiet. The birds had fallen entirely still now, and even the smallest movements in the undergrowth had ceased. It was not an absence of life. No, it was the presence of attention. Everything around me seemed to be listening. The trees, the air, the ground beneath my feet, all of it turned, in its own quiet way, toward the same distant sound. I continued on. The slope beneath my feet grew steeper, and the earth became damp with the slow gathering of unseen water. Moss thickened along the stones, and the roots that crossed my path darkened with moisture. Then, through the trees ahead, I began to see it. A faint glow, not bright, not enough to challenge the fading daylight, but present. A soft, pale light that seemed to drift in the mist gathering between the trunks. The sound led me toward it, and soon the trees began to part, not abruptly. Whispergrove rarely reveals its hidden places all at once, but gently, as though the forest itself had decided that I might pass. The ground leveled beneath my feet, and the sound of water, true water now, joined the melody I had been following. A waterfall, modest in size though steady in its flow. Water spilled over a ridge of dark stone, falling into a clear pool below, before continuing on as a narrow stream that wound its way back into the forest. Mist rose softly from where it struck the surface, catching the last light of the afternoon and holding it there for a moment longer than seemed entirely natural. And there, at the edge of the pool, sat the musician. He sat upon a low stone near the water's edge, his back slightly bent, the violin resting beneath his chin as though it had always belonged there. His movements were steady, not hurried, not hesitant. Each motion of the bow followed the same careful pattern, drawing the same sequence of notes from the instrument with quiet precision. He did not look up as I approached, nor did he falter. If he was aware of my presence, he gave no sign of it. For a time, I remained where I was, just beyond the edge of the clearing, watching and listening. The melody was clearer here, simple in structure, but carried with a weight that did not belong to something so small. It repeated, as it had before, again and again, never rushing, never changing, as though it had been given a single purpose and had long since forgotten how to do anything else. It was then that I noticed the water. At first, the movement of the waterfall appeared as it should, a steady flow over dark stone, breaking into countless smaller streams as it fell. But the longer I watched, the more a subtle pattern began to reveal itself. The water did not fall freely. It moved, in time. Each shift in the melody was met with a slight change in the rhythm of the fall. Each drawn note seemed to guide the water's descent, shaping its motion in ways too precise to be coincidence. I stepped a little closer. The musician continued to play, the bow moved, the notes followed, and the water obeyed. It was not a dramatic thing, not at first, but once seen, it could not be unseen. The waterfall did not simply exist, it listened. "How long have you been here?" I asked. The question felt small against the weight of the place. For a moment I thought he might not answer at all, but after a time, without lifting his gaze, he spoke. "I do not remember arriving." His voice was quiet, not strained, but worn, in a way that suggested it had been used very little. The melody did not falter as he spoke. "Then why remain?" I asked. The bow slowed, ever so slightly, and for the first time a change entered the music. Not a mistake, a hesitation. "It must not stop." The words settled into the air between us. No explanation followed them, only the steady return of the melody to its familiar path. I considered the water again, the way it moved, the way it followed, and after a moment, I asked the only question that seemed to matter. What happens if it does? The bow came to a stop. The final note lingered, just long enough to be noticed. And then, silence. The waterfall ceased, not slowed, not lessened, stopped, mid-fall. Every drop of water hung suspended in the air, caught between what it had been and what it was meant to become. The mist vanished. The sound of the forest disappeared. Even the air itself seemed to forget how to move. The silence that followed did not belong to the forest. It pressed inward from all sides, heavy and absolute. Then came the sound, not from above, not from the trees, but from within the water itself, a low, shifting presence, not loud, but deep, as though something beneath the surface had turned and taken notice. The musician moved first. The bow returned to the strings with sudden urgency, drawing the melody back into existence before the silence could fully settle. The moment the sound returned, the world followed. The water fell, the mist rose, the forest breathed once more, and whatever had stirred beneath the surface grew still again. Neither of us spoke for a while. There are moments in the forest that do not invite conversation. This was one of them. Instead, I turned my attention to the space around the waterfall. Old places, I have found, rarely rely on a single thread to hold their shape. If the music was part of this place, it was not the only part. It was then that I noticed the stone. Set slightly apart from the water's edge, half hidden beneath moss and shadow, it rested where the roots of a nearby tree had grown carefully around it. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, just another piece of old earth, shaped by time. But something about it did not sit quite right. Perhaps it was the way the moss avoided a narrow line along its surface, or the faint impression that its edges had once been sharper than they now appeared. I stepped closer. The musician's playing did not stop. But I felt, rather than saw, a shift in his attention. The melody grew tighter, more deliberate, as though it too had noticed where I stood. I brushed aside a thin layer of moss. Beneath it, the stone revealed itself. Not natural, shaped, carved long ago, with markings that had softened with time, but not entirely faded. They were not symbols I recognized, nor did they seem meant to be understood in any simple way. But their purpose, that was clearer. They followed the same pattern as the music, a repetition, a cycle, a structure that held something in place. It seemed to me then that the music was not the cause of the stillness, but its answer. I rested my hand against the stone. It was cold, colder than it should have been, even in the shade. Behind me the music shifted, not broken, but strained. "Do not," the musician said quietly, not as a warning, but as a plea. I considered his words, and the water, and the silence that had followed when the melody ceased. Then, gently, I moved the stone. It was not fixed as firmly as I had expected. The roots resisted for only a moment before releasing it with a soft, damp sound. The instant it shifted from its resting place, the music broke. Not gradually, but completely. The bow slipped from the string, the melody ended, and once again the waterfall stopped. This time the silence arrived faster, heavier. The suspended water trembled, not falling, but remembering. The sound beneath it returned, stronger now, closer. Shapes moved within the still surface, not reflections, not distortions, but something else, something that had waited and no longer needed to wait quite so patiently. Behind me, the musician fell forward, the violin slipping from his grasp as the tension that had held him upright finally released. For the first time, the place felt unbalanced, as though something long contained had begun to reconsider its boundaries. I stepped back from the water's edge, not in panic, but with the understanding that my presence was no longer the only thing of consequence there. After a moment, the forest returned, not fully, not as it had been, but enough. The water did not fall, not yet. It lingered, uncertain, and whatever moved within it remained, quiet, but awake. I helped the musician to his feet. He was lighter than I expected, as though much of him had been spent long before I arrived. He looked toward the waterfall, his expression not one of relief, but of quiet acceptance. "You have quieted it," he said, his voice steadier now, but not for long. I followed his gaze. The water shifted, only slightly, but enough to suggest that its stillness would not last forever. We did not remain there. Some places, once changed, ask not to be lingered in. I guided him back toward the trees, away from the water and its silent attention. The forest received us without question, as it always does. And as the distance between us and the waterfall grew, the familiar sounds of Whispergrove slowly returned. Wind, leaves, the quiet life of the woods continuing its patient work. Yet even then, something felt different, subtle, but certain. And though the forest soon found its voice again, I could not help but notice that the water did not sound quite the same. The fire beside you is burning low now, traveler. The night beyond the trees has grown quiet once more, and somewhere deep within Whispergrove, a waterfall waits, no longer bound as it once was. You are safe to rest. Good night, my friend. May the paths you follow always lead you to places that listen as carefully as they speak. And may you always know when it is time to leave something as it was.